all over the city, all over the place, in email, everywhere. She will tell you the truth, she will tell you what it is, and she will fight for her own freedom and ours. I've seen her do it time and time again, and I'm just so grateful that she is willing to be in my home, where people I love, and share her words and the way that God has blessed her with all of us. Please welcome Zan West.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that introduction. I was thinking this morning about how we're probably more likely to be like chained next to each other than we are to be in a house of worship. So how grateful I am to be in a house of worship with you this morning. I want to get started by first thanking the people of First Congregational Church of Oakland. I'm so grateful to be worshiping here with you this morning. I was enjoying worship so much that I actually forgot I was here to do something. I also really want to thank the congregation which I serve as student ministry director, Trinity United Methodist Church, who was willing to worship without me this morning so that I can be here with you. I want to thank my mother, father, sister, and partner who are here to support me. My mother, sister, and I, we all work at 3 different churches, so it is rare these days that we get to worship together. So I feel profoundly blessed and grateful to be sharing the worship space. And also want to thank the friends and family that have come from PSR, come from the front lines of making trouble in the street, all kinds of things. And from Taylor, very grateful for everyone to come. And I want to also thank the ancestors whose shoulders I stand on. So many of my ancestors were only allowed to worship in plantation churches and hush harbors. Couldn't imagine a day when women were allowed to stand in a pulpit. And I just want to acknowledge that I am here because of their audacious dreams. Yeah. And I'm so grateful, and I pray that my ancestors continue to teach me how to dream audaciously. Yeah. I also would like to thank the Divine Spirit that has brought me here and everything that I have been through to arrive at this moment. I feel profoundly grateful, and I feel profoundly grateful for the way that the Spirit has moved in here this morning. I want to ask you now to turn your hearts and minds towards Spirit and pray with me on the idea of when peace kissed justice. When I was a little kid, my brother and I sometimes fought a little bit relentlessly. Sometimes if over just the right show or toy and my parents were sufficiently out of earshot, it could get a little physical in a way that only siblings can understand. Like with the full intention of not only killing you, but deleting you from the family history. I remember one incident in particular. I think I'd changed the television to watch My Little Ponies, and naturally my brother responded by pushing me off the bed. As I fell off the bed, I hit my head on a nightstand and went crashing to the floor. My mother, who heard the commotion, came running and discovered what had happened. She checked me over quickly to find out that I did not need medical attention, and quickly responded by giving us both quite a few choice words. What I remember after that is her standing my brother up next to me, and in a very stern voice saying, "Tell your sister you're sorry." "Sorry," my brother said. And I sniffled a little bit, and my mother said, "Say it like you mean it." Through clenched teeth, he said, "Sorry!" And I continued sobbing, of course. Finally, he said, "I said sorry. Why are you still crying?" And I remember sniffling and whispering and saying, "Because it still hurts."
Yes.
Yes. I feel like I've seen a similar story play out on the world stage. I've seen too many, and dare I say it, especially in the church, that seemingly rush towards reconciliation. That too often, sometimes we echo the sentiments of my brother, "I said sorry. Why are you still crying?" The rhetoric can be rooted in an insistence that the offending party has the right to determine the timeline for the restoration of harmony.
Yes.
And sometimes it even seems that the greater emphasis can be put on the intention of the action instead of grounding in the very real impact we can have. Yes. That's not what I meant is no longer justifiable means to avoid accountability. Dare I say it today, church, that avoiding restoration and rehabilitation on the route to reconciliation is like trying to build a house without a frame. Yes. I have a godson named Phoenix who is unbelievably now 5 years old and just started kindergarten. When he was 4, we were driving home one night and we heard a police siren coming up behind us. As the sound approached, I wondered what this little tiny person knew about the police, and I asked him, "Phoenix, if the police are going this way, what do you do?" And in his little tiny toddler voice, he said, "Go that way." Yes. And pointed in the opposite direction. He hasn't yet entered kindergarten, he can't write his name, he can't add numbers, he can't call home without some help from his mom or his godmom, and already he knows that his little tiny black body should be cautious of the police, because you don't actually need kindergarten for that. And some may say that part of this is about a narrative that parents are spinning to their children, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with you. But I would also point out that in his short 5 1/4 years on this earth, he's already had enough experiences to confirm this bias. Indeed, when he was 18 months old, the Oakland Police Department banged on his front door. His teenage sister, who was watching him, answered the door and let the police know that she and the 2 young boys, Phoenix and his toddler brother, were the only ones in the apartment. The police pushed through the door, guns drawn at the children anyway, and proceeded to raid the entire home before they realized they were on the wrong floor of the complex. It is not my intention this morning to talk to you about politics. It is my intention to talk to you about children and justice for our children. I want to talk to you about how little Phoenix, and sometimes I wonder if he consciously or not knows about Trayvon Martin, murdered on the way home from the store, Tamir Rice, who died while playing with toys, or Ayanna Stanley Jones, who was a 7-year-old little girl who died in her own bed, or God's new little angel, Tyree, 13 years old, children. And when Phoenix and I watch television together, and there are endless processions and honoring and mourning and contemplation and exalting and eulogies and rethinking and more memorials and valorizing for slain police officers. I'm not willing to say that that's not right, but what I can't do is explain to him why there aren't similar memorials for children that look like him. I can't explain why a country wants to think more deeply when some people die and blame children and children's parents when other people die. I can't explain why our country is engaged in a national dialogue where one perspective is that a 13-year-old little boy is essentially responsible for his own death. I can't explain why when the police are coming, he needs to go that way. And I mourn for a country that buries children without turning from its sins. I cry out like the psalmist in Psalm 85:4, "Restore us again, God our Savior." I weep for this unnatural state of children as ancestors. And even though some days I don't feel able to forgive because I want Phoenix's life to amount to more than the next memorialized hashtag. And I want to make him that promise, and I can't. And instead I cry out, "Restore us again, God our Savior." In the past several months, I've been on several conference calls with clergy around the country that are engaging Black Lives Matter within their congregations and communities. On the conference call, many of the faith leaders have discussed what they're doing in their local communities to address uprisings and movements for Black lives. The overwhelming majority of the faith communities across race are having prayer breakfasts with youth and police, or some version of what I would call invite your local police officer to church day. I have to say there is a strange irony to me in churches that invite police officers to come in full uniform with their guns, but turn around and tell youth to pull up their pants or pull their skirts down. Too many faith communities are rushing to reconciliation. And while sometimes it does come from a loving place, our children are demanding justice. They are not asking for peace.
Yes.
Especially when police officers seem to rarely offer much accountability. Our children in Baltimore and Ferguson and Oakland, they are the ones most impacted. Therefore, they get to determine the timeline for restoration of harmony.
That's right.
Children are hurting about the world that we have gifted them, and rightfully so. It is compassionate and perhaps necessary that we just provide them places to hurt and have their hurt affirmed and healed.
Yeah.
When I look around, it seems too often those crying out in the land are calling for peace and reconciliation, and that is understandable. Conflict is challenging, it is uncomfortable, it is messy, it is intangible. It can bring up the past as quickly as it can bring up the future. But we cannot allow calls for justice to be overshadowed by calls for peace.
Yes.
Allow me to bring forth prophetic words of past and present. The prophet Jeremiah tells us in chapter 6, verse 14, "They dress the wounds of my people as if it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace."
Yes.
Oakland, Richmond, San Francisco, Baltimore, there is no peace. Or perhaps the more modern day prophet Bob Marley, who exclaimed in his song War, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, this is war.
Yes.
And until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship, a rule of international morality, will remain but a fleeting illusion, to be pursued but never attained. Now, everywhere is war.
Yes.
Or perhaps it can be said like this, how it was said by the biblical scholar, Reverend Dr. Aubrey Hendricks, who I recently had the pleasure of studying with. In his book, The Politics of Jesus, he said that, quote, "Jesus not only sought to address the symptoms of people's sufferings, but also, and here's the rub, that he sought to alleviate the systematic causes of their suffering," end quote. All of this serves to remind us that calls for peace and reconciliation when there is only injustice serve to be complicit with those that harm.
Yes.
We cannot say, "I'm sorry," and assume that that means people are not hurting as my brother did, especially if the condition that gave rise to the harm is still intact.
That's right.
Lest we forget that Jesus himself was a victim of a decree for peace known as Pax Romana, a piece of ancient legislation that disallowed anything that may create unrest in the Roman Empire. Jesus' traveling life coaching ministry was about equality and liberation and a direct threat to peace in the land,
Yes.
because Jesus was working for justice.
Yes. Yes.
Just like my brother had to account for the hurt after he pushed me off the bed, we must not allow calls for peace to be a convenient way to deflect from accountability for people being hurt.
Yes.
We may not gloss over the harm all of us are feeling, and we must take time to talk about the differences and the similarities in our harm. We must talk about the power and the privilege in the ways that we harm. And we must talk intersectionally about how power is even used in marginalized communities.
Yes. Yes.
We must talk about how churches, activists, and nonprofits sometimes protect abusers in the state and offices and pews, even when it isn't power. Sometimes it's just popularity that determines who will be saved and who will be slaughtered.
Yes.
We must begin to understand that those of us who have the most compassion for humanity are sometimes at risk for being manipulated by those who abuse power. There is so much to lament. There is so much to heal from, and there is no peace in the land. Yet, the beloved Dr. King was not wrong for telling us to strive to love our enemies. The brilliant Madiba was not misinformed for forgiving his captors. I believe the poet Gabriel Garcia Marquez, when he wrote in 100 Years of Solitude,